They told you you'd be fine, that being sensitive was just a personality, but no one warned you how it can turn into a slow, invisible collapse. That sensitivity can become a doorway for other people's shadows to enter, until your soul is no longer your own. This is the hidden danger, not in what you feel, but in what no one else sees. You don't just feel more, you carry more. And if you don't wake up, it will bury you from the inside. This message is for those who've been drowning silently and smiling anyway. There are people in this world who were not built for noise, not built for speed, not built for pretending they were born, listening to the parts of life most others tune out, the flicker behind someone's smile, the tension before a storm, the sorrow. In a quiet room they sense it all, even when no one speaks a word. They do not seek attention, but attention follows them, not because they shine, but because they reflect like mirrors. They take in light, shadow, and everything in between. Their hearts were shaped in the space between two worlds, between what is said and what is truly meant, between the seen and the unseen. Carl Jung once called them those born too close to the veil, and once you've lived too close to that edge, you no longer belong to just one world. You feel too much, too deeply, too suddenly, and the world, in return, feels too loud, too harsh, too heavy. They call you soft, but you are not soft. You are open, and being open in a world that runs on numbness is an act of quiet rebellion. You walk among crowds, but you never quite feel part of them. You sense the undercurrents before they become floods. You ache in ways you cannot name, and long before anything breaks, you already feel the fractured. Is not weakness. It is a gift, but like most sacred things, it comes at a price, because to be this receptive is to carry what others discard, to hear what others silence, to see what others deny. You feel the sorrow of those who cannot cry, the fear of those who pretend to be brave, and the weight of truths no one dares speak, and so you retreat, not to hide, but to survive. Solitude is not loneliness for you, it is sanctuary, a place where the noise softens and the soul can breathe again. But even in solitude you are never fully alone, because the veil never closes, the whisper never stops, and there is a reason for that, a calling, a summoning, a thread pulling you deeper. It doesn't shout, it doesn't push, it simply waits until one day you stop running from your sensitivity and realize it was never a flaw. It's the first sign that you were born to see differently, to feel more honestly, to witness the world as it is, not as it pretends to be. This is the beginning of a very old story, a quiet initial one that begins with a whisper no one else hears, but that lives inside you like a memory you never chose, but cannot forget. You are not weak, you are a mirror, but the mirror you are does not only reflect smiles and sunlight, it reflects the shadows no one wants to see, and worse, you absorb them. You don't just sense what someone feels, you sense what they bury. You sense what the entire room is trying to hide. You feel the sorrow of a grandmother who never cried, the rage of a father who stayed silent, the anxiety of generations compressed into a single breath. Others call it being too sensitive, but you are not too sensitive. You are wide open, and in this world, that is dangerous, because when your boundaries blur, your soul becomes a sponge, soaking up every unshed tear, every suppressed scream, every unspoken ache. You wake up tired, not from sleep, but from carrying 1,000 emotions that aren't even yours. You walk into a room and feel pain before anyone says a word. You hug someone and feel their grief through your spine. You read a sentence and weep because the space between the words is full of silence, full of something lost. This is the hidden truth about highly sensitive people. They are not emotional wrecks, they are emotional vessels. They do not just react, they resonate. They do not just understand, they embody. But that resonance is not always beautiful. It is often brutal, because the unconscious does not ask for permission. It pours into those who can hold it. And if you're not ready, you drown. You start confusing what is yours and what is not. You call ancient grief your own. You name collective panic as personal failure. You blame yourself for feeling too much, when in fact, you're feeling what the world refuses to feel, and that is not your fault. But it is your responsibility, because until you learn to distinguish between me and them, between mine and not mine, you will carry what was never yours to begin with. Carl Jung warned us, the unconscious does not care whose pain it gives you. It simply flows where the container is open, and you, dear empath, are wide open. But without discernment, that openness becomes suffering. Without boundaries, that mirror becomes a black hole, swallowing everything until you can no longer see where the darkness ends and where you begin. This is not a metaphor, this is psychic reality, and many, far too many, never learn this distinction. They live flooded, drenched in emotions they never understood, never knowing their body is not just reacting, it's absorbing. But now that you see this, Now that you understand what kind of mirror you are, you can begin the real work, not to shut the mirror but to clean it, to protect it, to choose when and what you reflect, because until then you are not living, you are leaking, you are not witnessing. The world you are drowning in, and you were not born to drown, you were born to see. When the world overwhelms you, your first instinct is not to fight. It's to blend, to dim your voice, to mute your truth, to shrink just enough so no one notices how much you feel. You adapt, you smile when you're not okay, you laugh when you want to scream, you say I'm fine when your soul is quietly flooding, because being too much has always been punished and being not enough has always felt safer than being fully alive. You start becoming who others need you to be, not out of manipulation but out of survival. You become the peacekeeper, the caretaker, the good child, the good listener, the one who says it's okay even when it isn't, and each time you do, a piece of you slips away, not violently but silently, like a fog dispersing at dawn. One sees the disappearance, because from the outside, you're functioning, you're kind, you're helpful, you're composed, but inside you're vanishing. Not in one big moment, but in 1,000 invisible compromises. You stop trusting your instincts. You stop honoring your emotions. You start questioning your dreams. You begin to feel that your truth is inconvenient, that your presence is a burden. So you silence yourself, not because no one cares, but because no one ever taught you that your inner world was sacred. Child Jung spoke of this quiet self-abandonment, how the persona, the mask we wear to fit in, becomes so habitual that we forget there was ever a self beneath it. And this is how it happens, not through dramatic betrayal, but through slow erosion. You hide your tears to keep others comfortable. You ignore your intuition to keep peace. You hold space for everyone but yourself. And at some point you forget what your voice even sounds like. You mistake being invisible for being safe. You confuse silence with strength. You think the ability to endure is the same as the right to exist. But enduring isn't living, and adapting isn't becoming, it's disappearing. Gracefully, the world will praise you for it. They'll call you selfless, they'll admire your strength, they'll celebrate how little space you take. But deep down you know something is wrong. You cry in places no one sees. You collapse when the room is empty. You dream of drowning, suffocating, or fading because your unconscious knows what your ego has forgotten. You cannot build wholeness by constantly editing yourself for others. The self, your true self, was never meant to fit. It was meant to stand, and no amount of external validation will heal the ache of internal exile. At first, you think something is wrong with you. The exhaustion, the sudden tears, the strange dreams that feel too vivid, too symbolic, too loud. Look for answers in the usual places. You scroll, you self-diagnose, you wonder if you're depressed too, sensitive too, emotional too, weak because everything hurts more than it should. Loud sounds pierce through you. Crowded rooms feel like war zones. Even silence, especially silence, can feel deafening. And no one around you seems to notice what you're carrying because you're still functioning, you're still smiling, you're still replying. I'm okay when you're not, but inside something ancient is unraveling, not in chaos, but in invitation. Carl Jung warned of this moment, though not always directly. He scattered it across his writings, a breadcrumb trail for those willing to follow this. It is not a breakdown, it's a breakthrough, not the collapse of who you are, but the beginning of who you were meant to become. The body begins to ache when the soul has been ignored for too long. The dream intensifies when the waking life becomes too shallow. The psyche doesn't knock politely. It breaks the door down when you've waited too long to listen, and so it begins a quiet pull inward, a sense that the world out there feels less real than what's moving within you. Begin to feel like a stranger in your own life. Your habits, your relationships, your goals, they all start to feel foreign, like costumes you once wore, but now no longer fit you. You may wake from sleep feeling like you've been traveling. You may cry without knowing why. You may look in the mirror and feel like something inside you is changing, something that has no name. And that's because it doesn't come from the surface, it comes from the unconscious, from the archetypal field that Jung spoke of, a realm where your personal pain collides with collective sorrow, where symbols become language, and where your life is no longer just yours. It is part of a myth trying to awaken through you. This is why you are feeling too much, because you are holding not only your wounds, but the grief of generations. You are porous to what others repress. You sense the disowned ghosts of entire rooms. You feel what has not been spoken for years, and the world has no language for this. So it labels you broken, unstable, dysregulate. You are none of those things. You are being summoned. You are being summoned by the self, the deeper, wilder, older part of you. the one that remembers why you came. It doesn't care about your career plan or your social image or your perfectly managed life. It cares about truth. It cares about integration. It cares about your soul stepping into the role it was born for. This is why everything familiar begins to fall apart, not because you're failing, but because the mask is cracking, and the self is finally speaking. This is not illness. This is initiation, and initiation never feels safe. This is the part no one warns you about. The moment when everything that used to hold you no longer fits, no longer soothes, no longer makes sense. Your dreams grow louder, your body trembles more easily, your days feel strangely symbolic, as if something beneath reality is trying to speak through it. It doesn't feel like awakening, it feels like drowning. Not broken, but you can't function. You're not asleep, but nothing feels awake. What you're experiencing is what Carl Jung called a spiritual crisis, a collapse of the false self, so the deeper self can begin to emerge, but no one around you recognizes this. They call it burnout, they call it overthinking, they call it just a rough patch, but the truth is, your soul is undergoing a transformation so ancient it has no name in modern language. The ancients had a word for it. Catabasis, a descent into the underworld, a sacred unraveling, but in today's world where everything must be explained, fixed, diagnosed, this descent is pathologized, medicated, dismissed. You begin to feel alien, like your pain doesn't belong anywhere, like your experiences are too strange to share. So you isolate, you withdraw, you search for meaning in silence, in symbols and dreams, and that's when the real work begins. Not the work of healing others, but of surviving yourself. Your emotions intensify, but not in predictable ways. You're crying at sunlight through the window, feeling terror in a room full of smiles. Waking up with your chest heavy from dreams you can't explain. You're haunted, but not by ghosts, by truths you can no longer ignore. And here's the most terrifying part. You don't know who you are anymore, because the you that used to please, perform, and persevere has been stripped away, but the new self hasn't yet arrived. You are between worlds, to awake, to go back, to unformed, to move forward. This is the invisible death, the ego dissolving, the mask cracking, the soul whispering. Most people, when they reach this place, turn back. They numb, they distract, they reattach themselves to anything that gives them a sense of control. But the ones who survive, they do something terrifying. They let go, they allow the confusion, they make space for the silence, they sit with the shapelessness, and in doing so, they create the womb for something sacred to emerge. This is not depression, it's initiation. It's the soul entering labor, the psyche preparing for birth. And just like any birth, it is messy, it is bloody, it is painful, but it is real. You are not being punished, you are being reformed, you are not being erased. You are being redrawn by something deeper. The chaos you feel isn't a sign that you're falling apart. It's a sign that you're finally refusing to hold together a life that was never fully yours. The crisis is not a detour, it is the threshold. You're not here to bounce back, you're here to break through. No one taught you what to do with your dreams, the ones that don't make sense, the ones that return night after night with symbols that feel too personal to ignore. You weren't taught that the unconscious speaks in images, not language, not logic, but emotion and metaphor. So, when you dreamed of being chased, of drowning, of strangers entering your home, you thought something was wrong with you, but it wasn't. Your soul was speaking, you just didn't know how to listen. Carl Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. And this is exactly what happens when we don't know how to hold our dreams. They slip through us like water through open hands, and we mistake them for noise instead of the guidance they are. Because when you are sensitive, your psyche doesn't just dream for you, it dreams for the world. The collective unconscious flows through you, filling your nights with floods, fires, strange animals, collapsed cities, and you wake up not just tired, but changed and still. You doubt yourself because no one ever told you that this was sacred. They told you to wake up and shake it off, to forget, to push forward, to stay logical. But what if the dream was more real than the life you were waking up to? What if the dream was trying to save you from becoming someone you were never meant to be? From forgetting who you were before the world told you who to perform as? The truth is, you never learned how to hold the symbolic, how to sit with an image, how to decipher a metaphor, how to respect the rhythm of the soul. So, you learned to numb, to analyze, to dismiss what was sacred as superstition. But the soul never gives up, and for the sensitive it whispers louder through symbols, until one day it screams. You begin to see your life through the dream. A fight with your partner feels like a mirror to a nightmare. A flash of fear becomes connected to an old dream of drowning. A strange stranger shows up in both your dream and your waking life. This is not a coincidence, it's a pattern, and patterns are the language of the sun. You learn to notice them, your entire life becomes a message knot. Everything is symbolic, but everything symbolic is a key that, if ignored, becomes a trap, but if understood, becomes a path. This is what you were never taught: how to read your own soul, how to hold a dream without killing it with interpretation, how to let the image breathe, grow, become. Jung didn't want you to decode your dream like a puzzle. He wanted you to relate to it, to be in dialogue, to ask it questions, to sit in its mystery, because some dreams are not meant to be solved. They are meant to be carried on. When you carry them, they begin to change. You slowly, subtly, without permission, they rewire how you see the world and yourself in it too. Become the kind of person who notices, who feels, who sees layers beneath the surface, not because you're special, but because you're awakened in a world that constantly begs you to fall asleep again. This is nothing short of revolutionary. There comes a moment, quiet but irreversible, when something inside you finally says, I can't carry it all anymore. Not because you stopped caring, but because you started remembering yourself. This is the turning point when the sensitive soul begins to pull back, not out of cruelty but out of clarity. You used to absorb everything: the tension in someone's voice, the sadness behind their smile, the silent pressure to fix what was never yours to fix. You became the emotional container for other people's storms, the empath, the peacemaker, the healer, and you thought this was love. But Jung would ask, was it really love? Or was it emotional possession disguised as devotion? You were taught that being good meant being available. Being loving meant being selfless. Being strong meant never saying no. But now your body is telling a different story. Are tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, but the kind that comes from overfunctioning. Dreams echo the cost. Leaking vessels, flooded homes, uninvited guests walking through doors you forgot to close. These are not just dreams, they are reflections of how porous your boundaries have become. Slowly you start to realize this isn't compassion, it's self-abandonment. When you carry everyone, you lose track of where you end and they begin. You mistake their fear for yours, their chaos for your calling, their silence for your responsibility. And when you finally step back, you don't just feel guilty, you feel lost, because if you're not the one holding everything together, then who are you? This is the heartbreak of awakening, the moment you grieve the roles that once gave you a false identity, and begin to seek something truer, something rooted not in being needed, but in being real. Jung said that the self, the true center of the psyche, cannot emerge while we're still fused with the expectations of others. And so this withdrawal, this refusal to carry, it is not abandonment, it is individuation, the journey back to your own spine, your own voice, your own mython. Yes, people may not understand, they may call you cold, distant, selfish, but they are not the ones who stayed up at night shaking with emotion they couldn't name. They are not the ones who felt their body collapse under invisible weight. Only you know what it costs to be everyone's anchor, and only you can reclaim the right to float. This. It is not about building walls, it's about building structure, because without structure, sensitivity becomes suffering. You're not pushing people away, you're calling yourself back, and in doing so you begin to realize something strange and beautiful. You were never meant to carry everyone, you were meant to mirror them, to reflect their truth, but not to lose yours in the process. You are allowed to rest, to say no, to leave conversations unfinished, to choose solitude over performance. You are allowed to be without explaining, without absorbing, without fixing, and as you do, you will start to feel it. A quiet power returning, not loud but undeniably. You are still sensitive but no longer consumed. You are still loving but no longer leaking. You are still available but only to what is real. You begin to notice it first in your sleep. The chase dreams stop. No more running, no more drowning, no more doors left open, no more shadows at the edge of your vision. The dreams begin to shift, not because the world has changed, but because you have. You are no longer just a receiver, you are a participant. The unconscious feels it, that you're no longer afraid to look, that you no longer run from its messages, that you stay long enough to listen, and because of that something extraordinary happens. There were floods. You now see rivers where there were wounds. There are now scars where there were faceless intruders. There are now guides. The dream has not disappeared, it has matured, just like you've learned to ask not, why is this happening to me, but what is this trying to teach me? This shift from fear to reverence changes everything. The unconscious no longer comes to warn you, it comes to walk with you. You begin to dream of fires, but you are warm, not burned, of wolves, but they stand beside you, not chase you of night, but it feels like sanctuary. Not exile. This is what happens when you stop resisting the descent and start collaborating with I too. Realize that the symbols were never enemies, they were invitations, initiations, portals, and now that you've stopped misinterpreting their language, they begin to speak more clearly. Psyche becomes a temple, and the dreams a sacred scripture. You no longer wake in panic, you wake in knowing, not always understanding, but feeling a sense of companionship with something deeper than thought. Because the dream doesn't demand that you understand it, only that you respect it, and now that you do, the dream meets you where you are, no longer dragging you into chaos, it draws you into clarity. You begin to live through the dream, to feel its echo in your choices, its symbols in your conversations, its presence in your solitude. It is no longer something separate, it is you, a dimension of your own soul speaking in image, and Carl Jung called this the point where the unconscious begins to cooperate, because you've stopped being passive. You've stopped being prey, you've become a mirror, a container, a co-creator, and this, paradoxically, is when the world around you shifts to, not dramatically, but perceptibly, conversations deepen, silence feels sacred, emotions become intelligible. You're not overwhelmed, you're informed, because you're no longer absorbing blindly. You're translating. The chaos of others doesn't possess you anymore. It passes through you, filtered by meaning, tempered by clarity. This is the gift of walking through the dark and not running from it too. Begin to trust yourself, not because you've mastered life, but because you've stopped fearing your depth, and when the dream no longer needs to scream to be heard, it begins to whisper, soft, symbolic, precise, not punishment, but presence. You no longer move the same way, not because you're trying to change, but because something in you has shifted. You walk slower. You speak less, you listen deeper. You are not detached, you are centered. People don't always understand this. They ask what happened, where you went, why you've changed, but you know you didn't disappear. You reappeared, not as the role you used to perform, not as the version of you they needed, but as you, not curated, not conditioned, but wholly have walked through the underworld, and now your very presence carries the gravity of someone who has returned with something sacred. You don't explain yourself anymore, you embody. You don't react to chaos, you witness it. And from that witnessing, you choose, not out of fear, not to be liked, not to be enough, but out of clarity and alignment. This is not about being perfect, it's about being real, and real is the world still tempts you to return, to shrink, to entertain, to numb, to abandon your knowing, but you've tasted truth now, and truth, once lived, cannot be unlived, so you let others walk their path without needing to convince them of yours. Love more fiercely, but from a distance that respects both souls. You serve more quietly, but with a presence that transforms us. Show up not as a savior, but as a mirror that once reflected others' pain, but now reflects possibility. Your life no longer screams, it hums like something ancient, remembering itself. This is what happens when the dream no longer chases you, but walks beside you, and the wound no longer defines you, but deepens you, and the silence no longer frightens you, but roots you. You begin to live not as a concept, but as a symbol, a presence, a myth alive in real time. Jung called this individuation, but you call it something simpler, something wordless, something true, and the world, even if it doesn't name, it feels that something in you has returned to its rightful place, that you are no longer surviving, you are inhabiting fully, softly, powerfully, and in that everything changes, not because the world has changed, but because you finally have.